What's up, guys? The Wall Street Journal put out a really interesting article on how to navigate rising food prices, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. You're watching More Money? Let's get it. All right, so this is a real quick video. I wanted to just go over this article that I found really interesting this morning in the Wall Street Journal. So as you can see from here, the article is really just about how to navigate the rising food prices as inflation surges. And it really comes down to planning your grocery store trips. And they provided a couple of tips here, which I'm going to try and comment on. So the first tip that they provide is you got to plan ahead. If you plan for what you buy, you're more likely to actually use it, and then stuff won't go to waste. And I think that makes a lot of sense because it's something like 30% of people's grocery store purchases go into the garbage. And I think a lot of that is perishables. You buy vegetables or you buy salad or whatever, and you think you're going to use it and then you don't actually end up using it. So I actually do agree with them. Planning ahead is important. The other thing, and this is something that my wife actually showed me, was there's an app called Flip. And what this app does is it aggregates deals based on your location and then incorporates them into your meal plan. So that's actually pretty cool. She's shown me a lot when it comes to using coupons, when it comes to grocery store purchases. I never used to use coupons. I still really don't. She does most of the grocery purchases for the family, but I found it interesting how she'll just go right to the checkout line, open up her Flip app, and then they'll just start giving her discounts based on the coupon. So that's pretty cool. And I've actually started using Flip as well. Now, substitution is very important. This was something that now I think substitution is always very important. I'm not brand specific at all. In a previous video, I told you guys how we switched over to French's ketchup as opposed to using Heinz ketchup. The same size bottle you get for $3 less. So it makes a lot of sense to use French's as opposed to Heinz. I still think Heinz tastes better. She doesn't. And like I said in that video, it causes pandemonium in this relationship, but I'm afraid of her, so I'll just use whatever ketchup brand she wants to use. Now, the other thing that they mention is you might use half the usual amount of ground beef when you're making a chili and compensate that by using lentils or other legumes to achieve a similar level of heartiness. I'm not so hot on that. Like, if I want beef, I'm just going to have beef, but I understand. And actually, my wife ended up buying more chickpeas and that kind of stuff to make meals with. So it looks like she is doing that already, but I think that's just me being a guy, and if I want meat, I want meat. I don't know. I really like this next tip that they provide where they're just saying to use your pantry and freezer. And so when, for example, things like dried rice and canned goods are on sale, maybe stock up on them. The only comment that I would have when I would read something like this, and they actually pointed it out at the bottom, is be very careful when you're bulk buying. I think, and I've fallen victim to this a lot when I was younger, is I'll go into a Costco and buy a lot of stuff in bulk, and then I'll just never use it, and they might actually go bad. And so I would throw some caution into the wind when it comes to stocking up a pantry with stuff that you may not necessarily use. I think the Goldilocks zone is, will you use it within the next 3 to 6 months? And if it's more than that, then maybe don't stock up on it. And the last point at the bottom here is what's interesting. So cheese and bread are examples of items that you can actually keep well in the freezer. In fact, all of our sliced bread now, we actually just keep in the freezer because we personally in our household don't use sliced bread as much as we may have done as we were children. And so one loaf of bread might last 3 to 6 months for us. So we keep it in the freezer. The other thing that freezes very well is cherry tomatoes. So in the summertime, we actually grow cherry tomatoes in the backyard, and then we just collect them together and freeze them. And then we use them for our salads throughout the winter. And of course, the last tip that they give us is essentially eat at home. And you know what I found as I was doing the Uber Eats analysis on this channel, where I did Uber Eats for 250 deliveries. A lot of people during the pandemic weren't actually cooking from home, or at least that's what I saw. I was getting way more delivery orders than I could handle using Uber Eats. So people were just ordering food in, they weren't cooking. But you can cook really high class meals at home for a fraction of the price. I think for New Year's, my wife and I did a steak and lobster tails, and I think total cost for us was about $40, and that would have cost $250 at a nice restaurant. So, I mean, you can really save a lot of money. Now, Do you want to make every meal at home and stay at home and eat? No, but we were still under lockdown at the time, so it's what we did. But yeah, you can really cut down the price of even nice meals by cooking at home. Now, if you're really feeling the pinch, because there's news articles saying that, people are now spending around $260, $300 a month more in groceries because of inflation or just in general costs. Well, what does this really come down to? And I think what they're really hinting at here is how on the cusp are you with respect to the breakdown of the costs of living. And here's an example of what I think is a reasonable budget. So I think food should be no more than around 20%. Transport should be no more than 20%. Housing, I think 35% is pretty liberal. And then, of course, personal and discretionary, maybe 10 to 20, depending on what your debt payments are like. And so when I compare that to where Canadians were in at least pre-pandemic, you could see that on average, Canadians were kind of in line with this. The shelter was around 30%, where the budget guidelines had 35%, so that was fine. Transport was 18.5%. Budget guideline was between 15 and 20. Food was 15%. Budget guideline was 10 to 20. So they're largely there. So on average, the average Canadian is somewhat financially sound. I think it might be that other stuff like the miscellaneous and the and the recreational costs that might cause you to not save as much. And then when we look at where Americans were, it looks like they're kind of in the same ballpark. Housing is 33%. The guidelines are 35 at the top end, so they're fine there. Transport is 16%. The guidelines is 15 to 20. So Americans are largely there as well. Food's 12.6, and the guidelines are between 10 and 20%. So, oh yeah, and I forgot to say that this chart is basically saying how does your spending break out if you make around $75,000 a year, and this is sort of how it breaks out. Obviously, if you are earning less money, more will end up going to housing and transportation. And so inflation is having a disproportionate impact on people who are poorer. That's for sure. And it's kind of sad, especially because I sort of came from that background. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to see sort of how my family stacked up to that breakdown of cost of living budget categories, because we really embrace what I would refer as sort of like FIRE, like financial independence, retire early. My idea of retire early isn't actually retiring. It's more being able to retire, but continue working, because I find a lot of joy in just working and, making videos like this. And as I was doing it, I realized we're really low with respect to our spending. And I think part of that just comes from growing up really poor. And so the neighborhood that I grew up in was the northwest side of Toronto. So you can see there in that chart, that's essentially what's referred to as the Etobicoke region of the city. And that might not make a lot of sense to you because you might not be familiar with the geography of Toronto. But, the point that I was trying to make is when you grow up poorer and you're just kind of always on the cusp of losing your apartment or whatever, you end up having what's referred to as financial anxiety. And that sort of carries with you into your adulthood. And one of the things that I do is, and one of the recommendations that I would have is I found this website called The Financial Gym, and they gave actually 4 really good ways to improve your financial anxiety, I think. And I guess the first step is to make concrete money goals and get excited about them. One of the things that really excites me is how much can I save each year? If I can save like 3, 4, 5 times what my expenditures are each year, I'm very happy. And so that's what I try to aim for. And it wasn't always like that. My very first year of working, I only saved 10 grand, but I was very excited to save 10 grand that year because I only made 45. So it was a huge accomplishment that year for me. The second thing is, keep track of what you're spending on, and this will help you take control. Sometimes, when you're keeping track of what you're spending your money on, you kind of get discouraged because you make expenditures and then you wonder why you made those expenditures, and then you feel sad. It's kind of like your weight too, right? Like sometimes you'll eat something absolutely delicious, but the next day your weight goes up, and then you just don't want to stand on the scale anymore, So this is a good and a bad, but I think the way to think about this is positively over the long term. Yeah, you're going to have some blips up and down, but over the long term, your finances are going in the right direction. So yeah, I do believe that it's important to keep track of what you're spending on, but just put it in larger groups. Don't nitpick on the individual expenses. Have that coffee or that avocado toast or whatever it is. You know, I would say be easy on yourself. Oh, okay. So that's exactly what I was getting at with the part two. So, you know, be easy on yourself. You know, you're gonna make mistakes. I would say not necessarily mistakes. You're gonna live life, and that's kind of how I would think about it. And changes don't happen overnight. So just continue working at it. And then the other one is with talking to someone. I think the best place to start would be your spouse. If you guys are aligned on being financially secure and staying within budgets, you're going to push each other to do that. And I don't think that that's just with finance. I think that's with your health as well. You know, my wife and I, we try and work out together. I'm usually the one who wants to work out less than she does, but she tells me that whenever I do want to work out with her, it motivates her to work out more. So that's why I try to work out more, because you know it helps her. And so we sort of keep ourselves aligned there more so than I would on my own. But also just with spending, you know, I'm gonna spend less. What we found is that when I go to the grocery store, I tend to buy a lot more than what she does when she goes to the grocery store. And so and I think that's part of like a food thing that I have, where I like to have a lot of food in the house. And so we sort of help each other with keeping our spending in check. And so I think talking to someone works. Having a spouse that sort of keeps you aligned really helps. I find personally what keeps my financial anxiety down is when I'm saving a multiple of my monthly expenditures. And so that really helps. And this is why I really started the channel. It's never been to make money. You can see that we have enough. It's more to help people. And ultimately, the goal of the channel is to help 1,000 people achieve financial independence much sooner than they would have. And that's why I'm doing the free class every Sunday. If you haven't signed up for it yet, by all means, I'll put the link in the description to this video. Please sign up. It's just a quick course on how to model out companies or investments. And also there's a Q&A portion. And I think what I'll end up doing is I'll probably end up doing more Q&As just in general, because you guys seem to like it. And so I'll just do a live Q&As more often on this channel. So that's coming. But also, guys, in the description, I want to know from you guys, and I'm going to put together a collaboration video on your comments of what you guys do that you feel is financially smart, but also tell me what you do that's financially dumb. I'll start. The one thing that I have done that I think is financially dumb is I ended up, when I was working in investment banking, I think it was the culture of the people around me, I ended up buying a really expensive car. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, that was kind of dumb. I could have invested that money, but it is what it is. So that's something really dumb that I've done from a financial perspective. And I guess something that I have done that's really smart from a financial perspective is we moved out of the city a little bit, about an hour out of the city, just so that we can keep our housing costs down. So there's a dumb thing and a smart thing. So you guys let me know in the comments what you've done, and I'll make a video on it. All right. Also, guys, if you haven't seen the video already, there's good news and bad news on the China front. And so I made a video on that, which I released yesterday. And so if you haven't seen that, the video link is right here.